Sounds great. So this is our first, we'll call it inaugural meeting for LLM Instance Gateway. Should be, yeah, agreed. Should be pretty easy. I did cut a PR to the repo for an API sketch. It's a proposal. I don't expect us to go over this too heavily because I'm just jumping in on you guys now. I pulled or cut the PR late last night, so I didn't want to ping anybody. But some things I wanted to discuss first and foremost, is this time slot the best? I mean, this is a biased audience because we're all sitting here, but do we know of a time frame that might be better for others that we know want to join? Or is this as good as any time? I know we're all busy.
Yeah, we should probably collect the list of interested parties. For example, Jeff and Jiaxin, right? We should make sure like they have the time to join.
Agreed. Kind of ties into the second point here of I would love to like make a poll. I don't want to. Okay, it's 7 p.m. EU. Okay, good to know. I'd love to make a poll in a Slack channel. I don't want to bother working group serving too much. Should we make our own channel for this? We can mention it in the working group serving meeting, but then just keep some of our noise contained.
So previous was we could try using working group serving, and then when it gets disruptive, we could switch. So I think it's probably okay to start and then just pay attention to whether we're overwhelming that channel. I don't think there's any reason not to use it. I've noticed some of the other working groups that have like projects, like they're pretty comfortable using those projects, but eventually, another chat channel gets spun up. So it's not a big deal.
Oh yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the proper CNCF announcement is, but we are following CNCF guidelines. Yeah, just so you know, Eduardo, if that satisfies. Apologies.
Yeah, we are recording, so everyone in the call, please behave. We are all trying to make this better for everyone, and remember that you are being recorded. Thank you.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. And then I believe the next point on transferring and improving the initial scope to the repo, Clayton, and if you want to take that away, I can speak to it. But
yeah, I added this. We should record the scope in a merged thing that can accept PRs. And the one disadvantage of the community repo is it's very like it can change. I think we can either put the proposal in the working group serving repo for the project scope, which is actually probably easier because then we have working group serving all the project proposals and their scope and charter there. Putting it in the initial repo, or in the LLM Instance Gateway repo, I'd probably say like working group serving is a nice working group serving repo. Having a proposals directory, all sub projects have a proposal seems reasonable.
Yeah, I agree. Like the project creation and sponsorship side of things, like higher level proposals, should fall into like working group serving repo, but more project specific, for example, API designs and project roadmap, should probably be within the project itself.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah, so Kellen, you'll just do a copy there, and then we'll all reiterate our support, and we can like shed on structure of the proposal with the one. I think this was. Did we do a proposal for a working group or for the serving catalog, or we just did the PR and discussed it?
We just did the PR, and I think we had a 15-minute discussion in the main meeting.
So yeah, this will be the first proposal then, and we'll just do like maybe like project proposals, projects, or just proposals, and we can do working group serving just has a list of proposals. I don't think we need any more structure than that. So and give it something like 001, so they show up in nicely sorted order. 001-whatever, something in the.
Just use the I think the PR number as well. maybe.
Oh yeah, that actually is use the PR number. Yeah, it's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Cool.
So
Okay, sounds great. And then moving on to repo structure discussion. We do have a PR here. I set up a basic skeletal structure of the repo. I have a lot of empty files just so the directories show up in GitHub. Otherwise, they'll be invisible. We can run through this if we want. We could do that offline. It's up to you.
I mean, we're trying to set up the structure so we can execute maybe like a couple of discussion points. So why don't we just run through it real quick, just so that folks kind of, because this is also the first sub project repo. So just like getting some stuff documented, because we'll probably reference this for other stuff in the future.
Sure.
So I guess like I had made a comment to you in the early draft, which was something like try to be as consistent as possible with KK. I don't actually know that all SIGs are following that in their sub-project structures, and I don't know if there's a better sub-project structure. So does anybody know if there's a formal recommended project structure for sub-projects in Kubernetes right now?
I think it's what Kube Builder basically puts out.
Oh gosh.
90% of them would like that.
Yeah, I have some strong opinions on this, just from historically being one of the obsessives about repo structure for KK. So some of my obsessions showed up in my comments to Kellen, so feel free to counter. Maybe like typically like docs command package test are like kind of the basics, and then either examples is pretty common. So I think this is fairly minimal. Packages for everything that's reusable code. Command is for the actual binaries. We follow that convention in KK just so that you can actually find out the entry points to the repo and not, or entry points for code rather than jumping around. So that's the one, like if whatever our binary is, we would add in there if we have one, or tools or anything that's expected to be used by an end user in a cmd/directory.
Should the examples folder be part of the docs folder?
That is a good question. I don't know what other, historically we had examples separate, but I don't know how that's evolved over time. I don't know if there's one of the examples was, there was often, it's a little bit like examples in contrib are very similar, which is it's stuff that is expected to work, but is not officially supported. So it's things like in other contexts, it might be like service unit files, or it might be, I think serving catalog is something that I would have said is a contrib style example, or an examples style thing. So if we want to put it under docs or not, I don't know how much examples we'll have. Like maybe like some stuff that we might have is the assumption being that we're going to have some Envoy stuff, and it's going to be more configuration-y, but it's going to kind of expect, there may be stuff that we need to make it work. That to me feels more like contrib or actual stuff that has to be there that most people are going to use versus an example, whereas examples might be more things like, the experiment stir, or if you just want to like, what does an xproc extension look like? So I could see there being enough stuff in there that docs might be a little too docs might be a little too constraining.
My concern is for a newcomer that it would be surprising to find code in the docs directory, but
okay. Yeah, we don't have examples in KK anymore. I think we got rid of it a long time ago.
And Eduardo, I did see that hack. Sorry, Clayton.
Go ahead, Kellen.
I did see the hack directory. I'm assuming that was just a bucket of random scripts and such.
Usually in KK, that's usually the tooling that is used to compose. There's usually a makefile, and then everything that the makefile invokes starts under hack. And I blame Tim for that. That was Tim felt very comfortable using the hacker. I probably would have called it build, but I think hack is consistent with the KQ ecosystem.
And we don't do we really need to come up with the whole structure right now versus oh, now we have a new script, and then it's like, yeah, we add. This is what at least we've been doing
Yeah.
with LWS and JobSet and Q. We've been evolving it as we needed. Again, starting from the cube builder structure.
Yeah, as long as we have docs proposals and we're reasonably consistent. So I think principles wise, we're basically just saying we're trying to be as consistent as possible with KK, and then we can bike shed and discussions, and maybe let's try to be as consistent as possible with the broader cube ecosystem. But that's not a hard and fast thing. So that's sufficient for me.
Cool.
Okay.
Next item.
So maybe try to get some review in and get that merged so we can start hacking it. So actually, so to go rewind, Kellen, the intent was to actually take some of the POC. So Kasha, I saw we had like an experiment stir. So this is actually what I wanted to talk about. The experiment stir, there was a desire to get some of the POC stuff in, and actually so people could like kick it and try it, to start rapidly iterating while we go through the API design phase, so that people can get something up and understand the concepts. Is that still the intent?
Yes, I have a PR out for that also. Poor Abdullah and Rob are getting, they have a few pretty lengthy PRs, I would say.
And the mindset here is what we want to do is take the code that we had for the POC and make it available so people who wanted to could go into the deepers and familiarize themselves with some of the technical trade-offs while we develop proposals. And then, everybody else kind of gets that opportunity. It's been, Kellen and Song and Kaushik and Rob and Abdullah, we're all kind of been hacking on the Google side, but we want to open that up and make sure everybody can see it. But that is a starting point, and we're not going to just put that in the repo directory. It's specifically kept separate, because what we're going to go do is do it the right way through all the proposals and APIs and get that up as quickly as possible too. So is everybody okay with that, just verbally?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and I'll make that comment. I think there should be the README and the POC. I'll just add some comments, Kellen, once it's merged, once we get the structure up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then roadmap review seems like you.
Yeah, and let's see. Give me 1 second to pull I have a list of features, and so I think maybe I'll ask. Is everybody kind of read the proposal? Kind of the rough idea here is a gateway that's distributing requests from multiple consuming use cases for different LoRa adapters or different, you're using the same LLM in different ways, passing that onto model servers. Does anybody want me to do like a quick rehash, or do we want Kellen to do a quick rehash of the kind of the structure before we get into kind of where we had been thinking about roadmap and features? Because I think the roadmap and features is a little bit low level, but it's a concrete artifact I have right now that I can say, like, here's what we're thinking about and how we kind of roughly prioritized it. So I just want to make sure everybody's okay with diving into that level of detail.
I mean, a 3-minute speech wouldn't hurt, right? If no one is willing to say yes or no.
Yeah.
Kellen, why don't you do a quick recap? Yeah.
Yeah. Elevator pitch I've thought about naming. This is absolutely a gateway, because we do want to be doing things like rate limiting, either on tokens or requests. We want to work with other high-level gateways. That's high level is a loose term, but we want to be able to work with other gateways, because our focus is on ensuring that we are sharing compute. The whole idea is, the reason LoRa is a pillar for us is because that enables someone to share their compute pool across more use cases than they have compute. So that could be true of like any sort of fine tune. If you want to use RAG, you could do that. LoRa is kind of been our focus, because that one seems to be more will be more adopted in the future. But generally, I would say that's the elevator pitch. Anything further might be too detail oriented. Is that fair to say, Clayton?
And I think, we can talk about architecture in just a sec. We kind of sketched through some, we'll have all those details. The idea would be we have a proposal. Maybe this is like point of order for like how the group wants to work. So Kellen, I'm going to defer to you and Abdullah and, Varun and others who've like kind of already thrown their hats into the ring. But I think the mental model is that we have proposals that are how we agree on things. We try to do a lot of stuff in repo and code and ad hoc. We try to get to a point where we subdivide and find owners for the various areas and features. But at least in that core phase, the first 3 to 6 months, like it's usually the same. Like it's usually like a small group of folks doing a lot of the stuff through coordination. We want to be as transparent as possible, and so I think in general, whenever for those who haven't worked on a ton of ecosystem projects before, I'll just rehash this as well. It's generally better to get as much as possible in a pull request or in a proposal or in a Google Doc. And it doesn't have to be a Google Doc. It's just something we conveniently use pre-proposal, just to make sure that everybody has a chance to follow along. So we try to avoid like doing small meetings that not everybody can show up to, but it's totally okay to say like, hey, let's sit down and then make sure it gets captured in some form. So at least for those who haven't participated, like that's the mental model that I'm assuming we're going to be operating under. Anything you'd want to add to that, Kellen, like how you thought about execution here?
I'd say that's fair. As far as just some mental assumptions I've made that I haven't written down, yes, I see myself, Varun, Kaushik, Song, Jiashin being primary contributors. Obviously, totally open to others. As far as communication goes, I would agree that documentation and I think this meeting here are going to be our primary channels to share with others. And then yes, obviously PRs. If anyone wants to be more involved, please let us know. That would be awesome. Yeah.
I think the goal as well is to have something like, deployable, functional, actually works, not just like, so that people can try it, are able to try it and provide feedback. So I think that should be like one of our like guiding principles here. We're not just hacking around. It's actually something that you can
continuously and progressively deployable.
Yeah.
And I know like I think a lot of the assumption is we're building this around Envoy. Obviously like we've kind of got an architecture in mind that was kind of gone through some of our internal filter. Kellen has covered some of it in the POC. I think we're trying to get approval on an architecture that we can do that iterative and continuous continuous and progressive use. It does not mean that we're not open to alternative architectures, and maybe like as a group we can kind of, the first time we get to a point where we have an architectural decision that's going to close us off, I think that'll be a good test for, us as a group. If there's things that you'd like to do behind the gateway API, or you want a certain level of flexibility and the architecture doesn't allow it, we'll record that decision in a proposal. And if we need to, if there's a trade-off between being able to continuously deploy something and exploring these big ideas, we'll do that when we get to that first big point of contention. I think from our side, Abdullah and I kind of are trying to get as much as possible to a real world state that people can concretely use, that doesn't solve everything, but hits that nice middle point between you believe that it can be extended in the future, and we'll definitely try to defer things that don't. If there's longer term objectives that we have to re-architect for, I think that's another principle we said probably is okay. It's okay to re-architect later if the initial architecture is reasonable for people and people can find it and use it productively. Backwards compatibility, like just another thing, and maybe this is like I'm almost thinking here, like, we just want to make sure that this goes in the project scope and like some principles, Kellen. So maybe we're kind of like just talking through some of these, and if others come up, we'll record them in the project scope. Is what are the principles governing what we're trying to do for the whole gateway project? It's okay if we get to a point and realize that we have to have a second version of the API that's different. We say we would rather go fast and be valuable. We don't want to spend a bunch of time trying to find a perfect API in front of users. We'd rather have users who are successful and happy. It's kind of a Kubernetes thing. We guessed, and we got some things wrong, like ingress. We got them right later with gateway. I would consider it a success if we get it wrong, but people use it and they're using it so much that they want to go fix the API with a V2. That's a totally acceptable outcome. So just like expectation of the continuous and progressive is that it keeps working and that we don't regress people. And if later we realize that we want to do something different, we'll pay that cost later, but with a strong backwards compatibility and forwards compatibility mindset. Jan?
So one question I got from internally is, it would be good to document the rationales behind using Envoy Gateway API, because internally at Red Hat, we are relying on Istio solutions. So
are you using Istio on top of Envoy or on top of something else?
I have to check. But yeah, basically, it's better to document these rationales that you may have went through already at Google, so that I can share with our networking group folks.
And I think that would be in the architecture proposal. I think that's where we would do that. Does that sound reasonable?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So with all that being said, any immediate questions? I'll just walk through kind of the P0s for an MVP that we were kind of thinking. Let me just get this shared. Any questions? No. Okay. So I have a doc. I'll try to fill out some more details. Can everybody see this slide? Make it a little bit narrower.
See the spreadsheet, yeah.
You can see the spreadsheet. Okay, so I have some like non-functionals and all that around it, but this is like my stripped down, like everything in this, everything from rows 2 to 16 was like we kind of were arguing and thinking about like feedback we've had. So this is a Google internal perspective. I know we've had some discussion to talk about this with Jajin and Varun, and like we've kind of added a few things in the ordering. So this is a Google ordering, absolute P0s. What would we want to be like as quickly as possible? And I'll get this in a form to share it with the serving working group. And I think as we discuss kind of like what we consider as MVP and go through the ecosystem community prioritization, I'll just keep adding stuff, and then we'll turn this into a roadmap doc in the classic cube fashion before we get too far along, maybe within a month. Certainly, this is kind of framing what we're focused on right now. So we want to have an API endpoint that allows you to plug in, actually. Sorry. So the real fundamental thing we're going after here is we're trying to improve the utilization of the backend LLMs. And so there's some way to exploit backend LLMs, whether it's fair or even load balancing. But like the obvious thing is, it's a Kubernetes project. A lot of people want to build platforms on top of Kubernetes, so have a KRM style API, but we know that people are going to want to plug into cloud load balancers. So while we haven't really talked about what's outside of this, at least at the core mindset is we needed to be able to deploy a gateway, and that gateway has to be able to route traffic, which means fitting into the Kube ecosystem. And a KRM style API is for the gateway plus the pieces around it is very important. And we want to show some minimal benefit of having the gateway so that it's not just everything gets slightly slower. We'd want to have like the base algorithmic goal for the entire gateway is you get slightly better price performance or slightly better latency by turning all this on. So this is at like the P0 of the P0s. It's just this, there's no actual sorting on the zeros. It just happens to be at the top. And I happen to think this is anybody who's deploying with LLMs should feel like they can deploy this and get a small benefit, which then gives them the flexibility to go deeper. This one I think is maybe the core row 7, the heart of the KRM API for what the actual use case is. So we've got a pool of model servers. We need to have an API that works for people where they can, just like ingress or service, they can say, I want to have a higher level construct above my model servers, an API that lets me capture an intent. The POC had this API. We call it, we've gone through a couple of naming things. I think the latest is LLM use case, but LLM route, it's the idea that you're mapping from a set of incoming traffic in the OpenAI protocol format to start and directed to an open, to a backend. So you're reading the body and you're looking for a model parameter and you're doing something with that model parameter that applies some logic and then you're sending it to a pool. So that's kind of the heart of the user facing or end user. There's 2 personas. I'll mention this right now. We don't have these classified by persona, but the wording, a few of them later on in the list, when I share it, you'll see it. There's like the service owner, the LLM service owner, and that's the person who owns the use case. Like I want to run a coding SQL or a code completion, SQL focused fine tune. And I've got a front end that's going to be doing all of the, listening for web requests. And that's going to, parse the request coming from a client application, do some fiddling, decide on a input string, and then ship it off to the LLM. And I want to load this LoRa adapter. The API will be translating whatever the model name from the client is to that, passing off the model servers and passing it back up. Let's see. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Sorry, I had to drop. I think then the next one in importance would be if the first one's about to get the gateway and the second one's about the use case API. The third one is you can put a model server behind the gateway, and there's a clear contract of what you have to implement. So we'd probably be focusing on VLLM. You can see that here in row 4. That was kind of one of the, as we talked with people who are interested, VLLM was kind of our first model server to focus on, but we know that we'll want to support Triton and TGI, Google's Jetstream. Is that right, Abdullah? Google's Jetstream inference server we want to support. We've had some discussion about could we make it work with K-serve backends. So having a clear protocol so that the advantage you get by deploying the gateway works for the main LLM model servers, but then anybody can go implement the protocol would be obviously a key MVP requirement. We don't want to be locked into just one model server because frankly, there's going to be a lot of them. So yeah, just calling out VLLM was our top priority just from practical feedback, and a number of people have support for this already in some of their gateways, but we're open to others. And I think this is actually the point of the protocol would be to allow others to build that implementation and glue it into the gateway and contribute that so that it's effectively used. So maybe I'll go back and revise this to say something like an ecosystem participant can add their model server, and like the project, the LLM Instance Gateway project makes that easy to do. LoRa adapters are important. I think we had a discussion like you can do prompt enforcing system prompts and enforcing context prompts. That really wasn't a priority for anybody we talked to. LoRa adapter was kind of because today you don't really have anything that manages LoRa adapters. Nobody's hit that yet. So we're going to focus on LoRa adapters. But if somebody wanted prompt, it's kicked down into like, it's a post MVP focus for us. But if people wanted to enforce system prompts, that'd be great feedback. I think just that we have a couple around traffic splitting. We felt that traffic splitting was super important for ML workloads, because most models you can't deterministically be certain before you roll out until you expose it to users, whether it's correct. And there's a lot of long tail effects in models where all of the base data that you have worked fine, and then you find that one segment of your user base, the use case completely falls apart. So in the coding SQL, the code completion SQL example, it works great for Postgres syntax and Oracle syntax. You get like a huge regression and you didn't have any of your tests. So we knew that some level of progressive rollout was going to be important. I think as we've discussed it, we felt that we just wanted to bake that in. And so some of the design, which Kellen will talk to as soon as I wrap up. One of the things, and you'll see this in the PR, would be if we integrate with HTTP route, you can kind of get load balancing or traffic splitting at the high level. But then as we kind of talked through, we do want to be able to do traffic splitting in 2 dimensions. One, I can roll out a new adapter. So I've got a code completion adapter and I retrain it on new data and I start rolling that out. Most of the time people that's a smaller delta, but there could still be a regression. So we want to let people have the ability to roll out new LoRa adapters. And then system admins have scenarios where, the model server pool, there's always going to be scenarios where like you're moving to a new version of LLM or Triton, you've made a configuration change where you're not sure the performance is going to pan out. And I want to allow the inference platform owner to be able to do progressive and controlled rollout of how the high level use cases map to those pools. And so I think we probably won't even really get into this yet in the design. I think there's going to be a further proposal that's going to need to come up, which is, or as we go through the roadmap and use cases, I'd like a lot of feedback on how people are doing rollouts. And I don't think we've had enough feedback yet on the kinds of top priorities. So it may be that we just have to balance this one. So there's 2 right here. The first one is the LoRa adapter. The first one is on the backend pool. I'm actually changed this up because like we talk about base model, but I know a lot of people aren't switching their base models more than once every like 3 to 6 months. The time between Llama 2 and Llama 3 was 9 months. Is that right? So we know that there's people who are pre-training and fine-tuning base models and then using LoRa adapters on top. We know that there's people who are swapping between different base models every time a new Gemma or Mistral, and they're kind of rapidly iterating. We expect that once you get into production, you're going to be a little bit more conservative about rollouts. And so we, at least for the MVP, don't want to give people no way to deploy. Traffic shadowing, Evan, I think is, I think we don't have as an MVP goal, but I think when we talk about the architecture, we're well set up with what we have from HTTP route to potentially do traffic shadowing automatically, but it may be something you have to do extra work for. So yeah, when I share this, please add that comment just to the general doc so we can start generating some of these and talk about triage. Shadowing comes up a lot. Nobody has directly asked us to go help make shadowing easier, but we definitely wanted to help make shadowing easier. Streaming API responses. So an architectural, we spent a lot of time on the architecture thinking about how we do this. Envoy isn't really that flexible to some of the, Envoy's a high scale microservice, modern proxy with fast reconfiguration. It's a very popular ecosystem. It's got, like Nginx and Apache before it. It has built a large collection of ecosystem components. Some of the architectural gaps in Envoy need to get improved. We need to make certain streaming is so common for LLM use cases that we don't want to, we don't want to omit the fact that we're going to have these they're not quite WebSockets, and they're not quite web requests, and they're not quite gRPC bidirectional streams. We want to make sure that we have good support in Envoy for them. So it's specifically called out here so we don't forget. A key design. Oh, go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, can we also add the gaps to the architecture doc as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
In addition to the
architecture, the architecture proposal should call out goals, non-goals, gaps, justifications for key designs, and then alternatives considered.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'll lean on Kellen for that. One I forgot. So some of the we've had a bunch of discussions in serving about workload APIs, and a lot of that informed kind of Abdullah and my discussions on like we kind of we know that workload APIs are important. We have a bunch of diverse ones. Depending on which orchestration system you're using, whether it's Kserve or Kaito, or if you're building your own third-party orchestration, we actually took a step back and we said we'd like for Gateway to be completely unopinionated about how your pods are deployed behind the gateway. And so this is a design point as well in Kubernetes. Services talk to pods, pods talk to services talk to endpoints, pods are converted to endpoints. You don't know anything about whether it's deployments or Argo deployments or stateful sets or jobs, batch or serving, custom orchestrator, and that's deliberate and by design. So this will probably go in architectural principles, I think, which is we will take a very strong principle to not be aware of the deployment type. If you give us a pod and it fits and satisfies the protocol, a pod with a model server on it that fits to the protocol and can answer requests, you should work. And any novel characteristics of the orchestrator, we need to be very careful about those. So those will be design points. I think those are all the key ones. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about serving. So we're kind of have this, we're going to share capacity. And if you share capacity and there's plenty of capacity, you just got to not screw it up, make sure that the different goals get reached. When you run out of capacity, you need to have an approach for fairness. So still kind of, this will show up in like the architectural diagrams and the API diagrams. And I think we'll probably have, Kaushik has some work. We're kind of trying to really define what fairness means, but it would be to an end user who has multiple independent deployments and services and LLM deployments today. If they have a predictable behavior, if they get too many requests for deployment A and they run out of capacity, it behaves a certain way. They have an expectation. If they have another workload that is very latency sensitive and they start rejecting requests the moment they get across some threshold, again, they have an expectation. When they combine those together in a shared pool, like we're proposing, they need to be able to achieve those. So we need to capture enough constraints on the use case so that we can fairly share. So Kubernetes does this for nodes, and Kubernetes benefited from maybe just, we didn't really have to think about this whole cloth. There's a lot of prior art on sharing nodes, sharing physical machines with VMs. Google had a lot of internal container expertise, others out there, Mesos and all that. We didn't really have to think about it like this, but I think we're going into this area. It's kind of novel. There's not a lot of systems that are doing traffic sharing of fixed capacity from a fairness. Databases are probably the closest to analog. And so we just need to be pretty cautious that when we put these together, we don't want this to be worse than you having them independently. And it's going to be maybe worse in a few dimensions. We don't want it to be a trade-off where the predictability goes to heck, but you get better utilization. We want it to be about as predictable as running two separate deployments on separate hardware. And that's going to be tough, but we've kind of got some algorithmic stuff. The follow-on to that would obviously be the unique thing about LLMs today, and less true for other generative AI workloads, is it's a highly parallel compute. Like accelerators are highly parallel, and most of the large model calculation is in some degree an operation that can be parallelized or sharded in some form. And as a consequence of that, we have a lot more knobs than we really did with CPUs. CPUs were all about the same speed. The way that you split them up was you time slice them on CPU usage. So you define what share of time slicing you get, and the Linux and Windows magically deal with it. We lack that. And so we want to be really careful to, fairness isn't enough. I mentioned those two, like, so the test case that we're working through is if you have two workloads, you put them together in the same pool, you should be able to accomplish the same. It should be predictable how when you run out of capacity, but you should also be able to accomplish the same thing. So with LLMs specifically, you can give them more horizontal hardware and serve fewer requests per replica and achieve lower latency per output token. And that is a key thing that someone running a code completion SQL use case, latency matters a lot for code completion. For summarization, latency is kind of irrelevant. You're okay saying, yeah, churn through all this, come back in a second, 10 seconds. So we have a pretty long tail of latency variation. When I put those two workloads together, I still need a way to accomplish that latency objective. So we kind of had this sketched out as effectively, we have enough algorithmic smarts that when we direct requests, if you need to have some model servers that are serving fewer requests so that they can have lower latency, and you've got, the remainder of the workload has to be kind of squished, we need to figure out how that works in concert with fairness. So that's a key objective, and that basically we don't want to get to a spot where we go to production. Like for the MVP, we don't want to ship an MVP that says, you can run all your workloads together as long as they're exactly the same workload and behave exactly the same way. That would kind of defeat the purpose. So this one's a little bit risky, as a bit of a stretch. We may have some compromises at MVP, but we'll try to continue to drill down on this. And I think I've hit all of the core ones. We want to compose really well with Gateway. Kellen mentioned that. I think that's going to be a key architectural principle, is that if there's a feature in Gateway that you kind of just expect to work, we don't want to make it harder for it to work. I called out one specifically, which is LLMs contain data. Sometimes that's data trained on end user data. And as a consequence, a LoRa adapter that's trained on HIPAA compliant data, we want to make sure that there's a way at MVP for most people, most of the time, to put auth in front of the gateway. It's not a very hard requirement, but I think later on, post MVP, people will expect authorization to LoRa adapters or do use cases. They'll say, adapters of a certain security level, you need to have, you don't just expose them to everybody. So I think we want to be aware of that if folks have requirements around authorization, or if there's ways we can accelerate that. I think that's an area we're looking for improvement. So I'll get this doc cleaned up and share it so we can have a discussion in the community. And it'll be a spreadsheet, and folks can just add comments and suggestions, and then we'll go through and do a triage. And as the architecture diagram, we'll try to improve these so we get the real crisp requirements for an MVP. And then obviously the MVP, we want to be progressive. So there may be sub stages of this. I think we're kind of developing, like, we want to get something that works as quickly as possible to get to the base idea. So we'll define like an alpha and a beta and a GA milestone for like what those goals are in discussion. So I ran a little bit longer than I wanted, sorry. So Kellen, handed enough to you.
Awesome. So
actually, let me answer Mathis's comment about this. So we'll put this in the architectural diagram. I think it's in Kellen's proposal already, but we can clarify it. So the feedback that I've gotten is LLM and LoRa is important, novel, and hard today. But a lot of the people we talk to aren't just running LLMs. They're also, we talk to people running like very long generative use cases. Diffusion is in there. New architectures, video generation might be extremely long generative. So kind of what I would say is maybe there's like 3 successive rings. And we can describe this in principles is we're trying to hit something useful with LLM and LoRa for MVP. We don't want to design, LLMs have some unique properties that, for instance, extremely long generative requests don't. If you're spending like 2 hours to generate a video or 10 minutes to generate a video, but it's still kind of online to a user, it's going to be wildly different than something that can complete in a few seconds and be parallelized. So what we're probably thinking about is we want to have the benefits of the gateway be extensible or kind of expand over time so that any workload that's generative that's based on transformers would benefit, because transformers has some unique properties, but other model architectures are going to continue to be important. Diffusion has some asymmetry, has LoRa adapters, but it's not the same. I think post MVP, kind of the proposal is let's get to something that actually works, make sure nothing we build is so obsessively laser focused on LLMs, it's completely useless to anyone else. And then have a discussion through the MVP period about which features would apply to multiple generative AI use cases. I would say we are use case poor right now, and people willing to bang on keyboards rich. I want to get that inverted. I want to have more things that we could go implement, like that would support the broad ecosystem, and then I want to get the ecosystem unlocked. So for instance, Mathis, like maybe you can take the ideas in the LLM instance gateway and someone could easily fork it and go make it work for, something that's like transformers but different, or traditional models. I think Jan and I have chatted about Kserve and gateway working together for post MVP to do traditional, but like it's just kind of like an idea in our heads. So I think there's space for it. We should have that be we'll try to define the scope, have a discussion, and create the room for the broader discussion.
Yeah.
And up to you,
I
Colin.
agree with that. Yeah, my mic works. Cool. Thank you, Clayton. I will say it looks like we got about 10 minutes left. There's been a lot of words we've thrown about. Wanted to pause if anyone had anything they wanted to bring up. I thought I saw some things in our agenda.
I do have just like a small question. Post MVP, will there also be a word for no LoRa workloads? Because like I'm thinking on myself, like NVIDIA NIMs, right now there's a way to run them without LoRa, right? Like just directly run the NIMs. So yeah, just thinking like post MVP, can we also consider like regular no LoRa workloads?
If you're not using LoRa, but you have distinct use cases with distinct objectives, I think that's an MVP. So you don't have to use LoRa to get the benefits of the gateway for MVP. We just may not have anything except you would just be, you have 2 different clients and you want the different clients to have different weightings. We would achieve that for MVP. And then if there's distinct model types, I think that's my previous comment. And in the NIMS case, like Eduardo, you're talking about different model architectures or different use case, different non-LLM use cases.
Yeah, my head right now is kind of like trying to wrap up. How can we leverage the gateway for NIM deployments? So, yeah.
Okay, so we should have that discussion. My mental model would be, we're focused on transformer NIM, transformer LLM plus LoRa, controlling that. We want that to be extensible to non-transformer so that as much of the benefits, but we need use cases and scenarios, and we should actively do that in the next couple of weeks and get that written down. So we'll come back with a plan for basically enough use cases that we can get to it. So I think that's totally reasonable.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a way to run NIMs with LoRa, by the way, but kind of like the default way right now, it's without them. Right? or at least that's how we have been running.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is a great example of like what's the protocol and what benefits transfer, and that's something we need to get written down. So happy to follow up with you on that.
Yeah. Cool. I will take roughly 8 minutes. I'm going to speed run this. So this is design docs done quick. Just real quick, I would love for everyone to read through this, but general ideas I want to hit. We focus on two personas, the inference platform admin and the LLM use case owner. I harp on our goofy naming. If anyone has better names, please let us know, but we are just trying to be as clear as we can. So inference platform admin, pretty self-explanatory. They are going to be the ones, and Clayton used the term backend pool that we will use. They're setting up the hardware. They are the ones that are saying, this is a pool of compute that I want to share. That pool of compute usually takes the form of pods and model servers. They also will be deciding on the resource allocation. They will work with various use case owners to make sure that the fairness metrics that a use case owner is setting is actually fair for the workload. We also are allowing or discussing some admin controls they might have, LLM, but then I'll move on to the LLM use case owner. The LLM use case owner is exactly like it sounds. You are the owner of some sort of LLM-based workload. You are much more concerned about meeting your SLO targets, making sure that your workload or service, whatever you want to call it, is healthy. You don't really want to worry about infrastructure. That is the platform admin's job. To jump into, and anyone can go ahead.
And I was going to add, Kellen, too, like we haven't really talked about the persona, but kind of the implicit assumption is that the person who's calling the LLM use case may be wearing the same hat. So like we don't quite have a mental model that we know works for, like there's too few people have bounced against these ideas to give us really concrete feedback, which is what we need. But the person deploying the front end workload that's parsing a REST, it turns a REST API or a, it's just a web app or whatever into a call to the LLM and the OpenAI protocol may be under this hat. They may be a distinct hat. We need real feedback, but for right now, I'd probably say maybe we could add on this one column, like this persona also covers the person who's responsible for calling the LLM, because we're kind of assuming that in a self-hosted environment, there's a little bit of an overlap. It's not quite like you're using models as service endpoint where you don't get any control, but like a team working on a LoRa adapter probably is pretty involved in the use case. So we think the use case owner probably wears both hats, the front end workload and the details of how the LoRa adapter is SLO. So just wanted to clarify that.
No, I think that's a great call out. That has been implicit, and I will make it explicit. But to jump into the objects that the two personas will interface with, we have the backend pool, which has been mentioned, and then we have this LLM use case. Again, happy to hear different names. But just to jump into the spec, because we are so short on time, LLM backend pool is going to be rather simple. It kind of echoes what a service might be, where we have a pod selector. I added some additional fields here, such as allow undefined models if you want to have a simple case where you just wildcard your adapters. And then this is more of an example of administrative control where you have benchmarked your pool and you don't want to allow a use case owner to try to set a teapot of lower than what you have specified here. That would be an error. It's a way for the platform admin to not have to be so involved and let them enforce their rules automatically. LLM use case. Go ahead. Sorry.
One comment, like if you scroll back, if we don't have like a clear idea of how these things are going to be implemented, at least in our POC, I would recommend to add like just a comment here instead of actually having a parameter. It says, sure. Okay, like in this place we can have such and such, just to avoid, like, because some of the spec here is something that we believe is going to be like the right thing to do, and I want to distinguish between that and the things that are speculative in nature.
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah, and I can call that out. I'll adjust that. Moving along to LLM use case, the crux of the matter is going to be in this LLM use case rule. So if we assume that you have a single use case you care about that consumes a single LoRa adapter, some of this is just for handling multiple use cases or multiple adapters within a use case. So to focus on simplicity, we allow this level of indirection where your model name remains the same to your front end, but in your back end, you can upgrade your LoRa version, which is where we have this target model. So model name is whatever you want it to be, whatever marketing name. Your target model is the one that actually is going to be sent to the model server and consumed. Pool reference mentions what pool or pools you would like your use case to be included in. The plurality is simply a convenience. There's no traffic splitting done between pools at the use case level. Objective includes things like fairness and your latency. And then target model is, if you're familiar with LoRa, you're familiar with this. It should be your target model name. We've kept this really simple and left LoRa administration to the user and the management of the model server itself. I think some of our early iterations we discussed maybe handling that where we specify the path, but I would say that's out of scope for our first initial proposal. Objective here, you see we have our teapot, and the target latency does include a percentile. So these are hard numbers here. And then we have this fairness weight. So these two together should give you, we're hoping gives a complete picture. We are basically at time. Would love feedback on this. If you want to start a chat in working group serving, if we want to do this in the doc, do this in the PR, if you want to reach out to me directly, however, feedback is very much welcome. That's what I got for now. I know we're at time. Cool. So for next meeting, I'm going to start a poll in working group serving, make sure the time works. I see a comment here. Yep. Agreed. Thank you everyone for coming. We'll be working on these PRs. I'll lay out some of our architecture principles that we discussed today. I'll be in touch. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.